What would happen if one day the Arctic sky echoed with warning sirens and Canadian territory became the new front line of a global conflict? Could this nation, known for its peace and safety, truly stand alone? The answer is no. Behind Canada is a powerful network of allies, ready to act without hesitation. Below are 7 little-known truths about the countries that would defend Canada at all costs. Number 1. United States, the ally that needs no name. In an increasingly unstable world, where borders are no longer measured by barbed wire but by satellite coverage, supercomputers, and joint security strategies, the question isn't who is a friend, but rather who will act before we even call for help. For Canada, the answer has long been clear: the United States. If we look at North American history through a geopolitical lens, we'll see that the relationship between Canada and the U.S. has never been merely neighborly. It's a uniquely integrated defense model in the world. No other pair of nations has created such a deeply rooted mechanism for sharing airspace, information networks, and military responses. And at the heart of that structure is NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, established in 1958 during the peak of the Cold War. But the story doesn't end as a legacy. It lives on, stronger than ever. In 2025, as the world is engulfed in multi-layered tensions, from Ukraine to the Middle East and up to the Arctic, Canada officially committed over 38 billion Canadian dollars to fully modernize the NORAD system. This wasn't just an investment in radars or missiles, it was a statement. Canada cannot and will not face evolving threats alone. And the U.S.? They're not standing on the sidelines. They've entered this battleground with a new shield called the Golden Dome, a $175 billion missile defense system designed to neutralize even hypersonic attacks, something only a few countries in the world can achieve. However, the bond between these two nations doesn't just lie in hardware or numbers. It exists in the way they've learned to think as one. Many senior Canadian officers are trained at U.S. strategic academies, and vice versa. Military bases are zoned and shared in real time. In emergency scenarios, a U.S. general can command a Canadian air defense unit, and the reverse is also true, a level of trust almost unimaginable between two sovereign nations. That closeness hasn't always been comfortable. For many years, Canadian public opinion resisted being too tightly linked to U.S. military strategies, fearing that Ottawa might be dragged into wars that weren't theirs. But the reality of 2025 has shifted that mindset. When Russian satellites increase activity over the Arctic skies, when unidentified submarines silently pass through waters near Nunavut, the question is no longer, what should we do? But, are we ready to face it? And the answer always comes with a radar signal from the south. Behind the political curtain, Washington understands that Canada's security is a natural extension of America's own. Without a cross-border radar system, without mutual defense bases in Alaska or Greenland, the entire northern defense line of the U.S. would be exposed like a blank slate. Canada is no longer just a friendly neighbor to the north. It is the first shield against any threat surging in from the Arctic Ocean. And let's not forget, behind the numbers are people. American and Canadian pilots sharing the cockpit of F-35s during winter tactical drills. Engineers from both nations rewriting supersonic radar navigation protocols together. Joint rescue teams standing watch for hours during snowstorms, searching for suspicious equipment buried under meters of ice. These things don't make front-page news, but they form the core of something that hasn't changed in over half a century. If Canada is threatened, the U.S. won't wait for an invitation. In a world where alliances can break over a single tweet or a cancelled trade agreement, the strangest thing might just be the resilience of the U.S.-Canada defense partnership. Not because they are alike, but because they understand. If one side falls, the other is next, and no country, not even a superpower, wants to fight alone on Arctic ice. So when geopolitical clouds gather on Canada's horizon, the first to rise and shield them may not wave a symbolic flag, but it will be stars and stripes. Number 2. United Kingdom. When history becomes a combat force. If the United States is the first reflex whenever a warning siren sounds over the Arctic, then the United Kingdom is memory, a memory that has never truly rested. For Canada, the relationship with the UK is not merely that of a former colony to an old empire, but the very soul of an identity, a strategic bond woven from blood, oaths, and centuries of shared resistance. And in 2025, that bond is not fading. It is being reborn in ways more dangerous, faster, and more precise than ever. When Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and his British counterpart Keir Starmer signed an expanded defence agreement in London earlier this year, no one called it a historic event, because the history between these two nations is already too long. What they did was not rewrite history, but reactivate a defense mechanism that had long awaited reawakening. And what does that mechanism include? Joint naval patrols across the North Atlantic, special forces training on European and Canadian soil, and cybersecurity experts sitting in the same tactical rooms, whether their accents are from London or Vancouver. But deeper than all of that, it is trust that requires no proof. It's when MI6 intelligence is passed to CSIS almost in real time, no top-level authorization needed. It's when Canadian soldiers can enter a base in Scotland and operate as if they were on home soil. No doubt, no distance, just mission. Step back to understand why this matters. In modern military alliances, true connection is not about signatures, but about the willingness to share risk. And the UK, unlike many NATO nations, has proven this not just with words. They not only host Canadian troops at their military facilities, but also proactively send defense advisors to Canada's northern war zones under operational compatibility programs, where Cold Warfare and cyberwarfare drills are conducted simultaneously. In 2025, it was Britain that initiated the plan to form the Arctic Sentinel Unit, a joint military group made up of the UK, Canada, and one rotating partner, tasked specifically with handling emergency scenarios in the Arctic, from submarine intrusions to attacks on cold region energy infrastructure. The special thing? No country leads the unit. It operates on practical consensus, meaning if a missile flies over Canadian airspace, British soldiers will be among the first to respond. The deeper you go into the defense relationship between the two nations, the more you realize that while the U.S. may be the steel wall, Britain is the strategic memory, the one who stood with Canada through 2 world wars, who deeply understands the value of sovereignty, and who will not let their partner stand alone when crisis begins. And this year, cooperation expanded into a domain no country can handle alone: cyberspace. As cyber attacks escalate against Arctic radar systems, energy grids, and satellite data lines, the UK and Canada have established a joint coordination center, Arctic Cyber Guard, with rotating teams working 24/7 from London and Ottawa, sharing data, vulnerabilities, and automatic responses built on AI strategy. In the shadows of wars without gunfire, missiles aren't what you need. You need friends trusted enough to hold the encryption keys. But perhaps the most moving image of this bond doesn't come from defense summits or bilateral documents, but from Ukraine. When Canadian and British soldiers trained Ukrainian troops on European soil amid real warfare and daily risk of death, they were no longer allies on paper. They were shoulder-to-shoulder partners, teaching each other how to survive, to fight, and to uphold the value of freedom. not for one nation, but for an entire belief system. So, if one day the Arctic is no longer peaceful, if Canadian territory trembles under the footsteps of an invader, who will come? There's no need to look far. The ally in British camouflage, the one who has stood with Canada through 2 stormy centuries, will appear again. Not to rescue, but to fight alongside. Because for the UK, defending Canada isn't just a duty, it's a matter of national honor. Number 3. Australia. The Southern Hemisphere. Ally guarding the Arctic skies. When people think of Canada's national defense, familiar names usually come to mind. The US, the superpower next door, the UK, historical roots and bloodline alliance. But beneath the media radar, there is a name few would expect, gradually becoming a vital strategic link in the Northern defense system. Australia. A country in the Southern Hemisphere, halfway across the globe from Canada. Why would it care about the frozen Arctic? The answer lies not in distance, but in strategic thinking. In an era where threats no longer come in the form of armed soldiers, but rather in data, satellites, unmanned drones, and battles for control of the skies, true allies are those who see the danger before it arrives. And Australia is exactly that. Since 2025, the Australian government and Canada have launched an unprecedented military and technological cooperation program. Integration of over-the-horizon radar systems, technology capable of detecting objects thousands of kilometers away before they ever reach airspace. Not because Australia has bases near the Arctic, but because Australia possesses Jindalee radar technology, one of the most advanced systems in the world, operated by space surveillance experts, exactly what Canada needs more than ever to maintain sovereignty amid the growing presence of Russia and China in polar regions. But this partnership isn't built solely on equipment. It's built on trust, proven through joint peacekeeping missions, combined military exercises in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and more recently, the Cold Frontier series of drills between both nations' armed forces in northern Alberta, where Australian troops learned to operate in -40-degree cold, and Canadian soldiers experienced strategic intercontinental coordination with a Southern Hemisphere force for the first time. Here's something many overlook. Despite the geographic distance, Canada and Australia are strangely similar in strategic structure. Both are vast nations with coastal populations, heavily dependent on global trade, and most critically, both are vulnerable if maritime routes and space-based systems are compromised. That's why in 2025, both countries simultaneously increased their defense budgets and signed agreements to share satellite intelligence and reconnaissance data from remote offshore patrol zones. Even more notably, Australia is now stationing engineers and defense tech specialists full-time at radar stations in Canada's Yukon Territory, while also allowing Canadian soldiers to rotate through RAAF Learmonth, an airbase with strategic visibility over the entire Pacific Rim. In an era where attacks might come from a line of malicious code or a hijacked satellite, digitally merging defense systems between the two countries is no different than jointly constructing a multi-layered defense dome, one that protects not just territory, but the very existence of critical systems like the internet, navigation, and military communications. Yet what makes Australia so trusted by Canada is not just technology or infrastructure, it's philosophy. Australians don't build alliances to showcase status. They choose a quiet but resolute approach, from deploying joint cyber attack response teams with Canada to sending military cadets to train at Canada's Arctic Warfare School in Churchill. They don't appear in headlines, but they are always present on the defense map. Perhaps it is this humility and effectiveness that makes Australia one of Ottawa's most trusted partners as Canada faces an increasingly militarized Arctic. And when global powers begin eyeing the white space on the map as a new geopolitical chessboard, Canada understands clearly. It cannot stand alone. So when Arctic night falls and radar flickers with signals beyond visible range, people may not see the Australian flag flying in the northern sky. But in the Strategic Operations Center, in layers of intrusion detection data, and in unmanned patrol loops cutting through the darkness, Australia is there, not out of obligation, but by choice. Because in the 21st century, distance is no longer measured in kilometers, but in trust that's been put into action. Number 4. Finland. When the quiet ones step to the front line. If countries like the US or the UK represent the loudness of traditional alliances, then Finland enters the global defense stage with a chilling silence. A kind of silence not born of unpreparedness, but of a cold resolve, forged through decades of directly facing pressure from the East. In 2025, as Canada searched for allies with real combat readiness in the Arctic, the name Finland unexpectedly landed on the table as a strategic and weighty choice. And it was no coincidence. As a country that had just officially joined NATO, Finland didn't step into the alliance like an eager rookie, but like a seasoned warrior finally allowed to wield both shield and sword. With over 1,300 kilometers of border with Russia, Finland understands that war is not a theory. It's a reality always on the verge of becoming truth. That same year, during a military exercise called Arctic Forge, 25 held in Sodankyla, a remote town within Finland's Arctic Circle, Canadian and Finnish troops shared ice bunkers, snow-covered training grounds, and tactical scenarios simulating northern incursions for the first time. No grand ceremonies, no loud declarations. Just rifles frozen at -30 degrees, eyes fixed on Arctic maps, and an uncanny coordination between two forces that once seemed worlds apart. Why is Finland so crucial in Canada's defense strategy? The answer lies in its absolute compatibility in environment, mindset, and combat discipline. Finland is one of the few nations to develop a nationwide defense system based on survival and warfare in extreme conditions. It's no accident that Canada's special forces regard Finland's military as one of the coldest and toughest allies, in every sense of the word. What's admirable is that while many nations are still struggling with reduced defense budgets and domestic priorities, Finland has committed nearly $6 billion in military aid to Ukraine, while publicly declaring its readiness to defend any NATO ally under threat. No hesitation, no delay, no conditions. That spirit is what draws Canada. And not just through words, both nations have signed a tripartite memorandum between Canada, Finland, and the US, aiming to co-develop a new generation of icebreakers, not just to cut through frozen seas, but to maintain sovereignty over newly emerging shipping routes due to climate change. In these negotiations, Finland didn't come as a small supporting nation. They came as the owner of Europe's top icebreaker shipyards and home to some of the most battle-hardened Arctic crews. Yet, Finland's presence in Canada's defense strategy isn't just about equipment or technology, it comes from a realistic worldview, calm yet deeply alert. A worldview forged by a history of living next to conflict. A place where people learn to survive in silence, to prepare not out of fear, but from knowing the cost of complacency. And precisely because of that, when Canada needs a partner who doesn't just say yes, but also says ready, Finland appears on the radar like a promise as cold as snow, yet firm as steel. In an era when international alliances are often measured by trade deals or short-term interests, Finland is a reminder that some bonds are forged from survival experience, from the ability to watch quietly but act without delay. And if one day the Arctic snow is stained by conflict, if the northern defense line needs someone to stand firm, Finland won't wait to be called. They will already be there, ready, long before the alarm sounds. Number 5. Germany, the quiet ally, the hidden force behind the Arctic defense line. If countries like the US, the UK, or Finland stand out clearly on Canada's strategic ally map through declarations, treaties, and large-scale exercises, then Germany enters the Arctic front in a different way, with few words, lots of action, and razor-sharp precision. In 2025, as the world reels from new geopolitical flashpoints, Berlin has quietly elevated its role in NATO's defense structure. And Canada is one of the most crucial junctions in this expansion strategy. In the West, many once thought Germany remained stuck in a post-Cold War mindset, cautious, legally bound, hesitant in military intervention. But that was the Germany of the past. Today's Germany is rebuilding itself not to showcase power, but to ensure that any emerging threat is detected, analyzed, and neutralized at its root. In that context, Canada is not just a partner, it is an indispensable piece in the strategy to control the North Atlantic and Arctic corridors. Here's something few notice. Between 2023 and 2025, Germany implemented its largest defense budget increase since World War II, and a significant portion of it was allocated to developing cold environment warfare systems, including drones capable of sustained flight in freezing conditions, stealth radar technologies, and especially electronic warfare devices specialized for near-Arctic regions. And Canada, not merely an observer, but directly integrated into that system. In a bold move, early in 2025, Germany and Canada conducted a joint drill, Operation Ice Watch, in Greenland and Norway, where the two forces carried out glacier patrols, simulated responses to unidentified submarine intrusions, and trained on how to set up digital combat zones in low magnetic conditions, a common issue in Earth's polar regions. Following this, Germany announced a satellite data sharing project with Canada, involving low Earth orbit coverage, expanding information range by nearly 20% compared to previous systems, a major leap in detecting stealth threats. What makes Germany an irreplaceable ally to Canada isn't just the tech. It's how they place deep trust in operational integration, rather than surface-level aid. In bilateral defense summits, German commanders proactively invited Canada to participate in cyber warfare training centers in Bonn and Leipzig, facilities that simulate multi-layer attacks on power grids, communication lines, and Arctic air traffic control systems. It doesn't stop there. German intelligence agency BND has expanded real-time data channels with Canada's CSIS, especially regarding unusual activity beneath the Arctic ice, submarine movement, radar interference signals, or signs of near-space warfare technology. No line of data is treated as mere reference. Every signal is processed as a command ready for immediate action. For Berlin, standing with Canada is not just about defending frozen zones, it's also a way to reassert its leadership role in NATO, especially as the U.S. increasingly pivots focus toward the Pacific region. And for Canada, this relationship doesn't come from pressure, nor is it rooted in historic sentiment, but built on pragmatic parallelism between two countries that see a future where the front line no longer lies in trenches, but in the white spaces of the Earth. And perhaps the most memorable thing isn't in any government memorandum, but in the quiet act of a German platoon this winter, choosing to stay 14 extra days at a training outpost in Labrador, even as temperatures dropped to -45 degrees Celsius, simply to perfect drone resupply procedures when communication bands failed. No one asked them to do it. No camera recorded it. But the Canadian military remembered. Because in today's world, where allies sometimes test each other through headlines and politics, a nation that chooses to stay behind in the cold to finish a mission not meant for them is the simplest and truest definition of a real friend. For Canada, Germany doesn't need applause. They just need a signal, and they will act. Number 6. Norway, the silent gatekeeper of the far north. When it comes to the Arctic, where ice doesn't just freeze the ground but also political calculations, no country understands the laws of survival there better than Norway. And for Canada, in 2025, Norway is no longer just a Nordic NATO member. They are the true gatekeeper of the polar region, the outstretched hand raised long before any signs of danger appeared on the horizon. Unlike major powers with vast armed forces or expensive missile defense systems, Norway's strength lies in real-world experience, conducted in silence. They make no loud declarations, need no cameras to prove their status, but in the harshest places, where temperatures drop to -50 degrees, radio signals die, and there's no way back, Norwegian forces are present every single day. And because of that, they've become an essential part of the interconnected defense structure that Canada is quietly building in the Arctic. In 2025, Canada and Norway officially entered a new phase of strategic cooperation centered on the Arctic Triangle Plan, a trilateral agreement between Canada, Norway, and Germany aimed at building a network of radars, logistical bases, and rapid deployment mechanisms along the ice edge of the North Atlantic. This wasn't just a cooperation statement. It was a clear acknowledgement that the Arctic is no longer a neutral white zone, but the front line of global influence competition. And within that triangle, Norway is the pivotal point. Why? Because Norway doesn't just border Russia, a nation increasing its military presence in the Arctic, but also possesses one of the world's best Arctic specialized naval forces. Their Svalbard-class patrol fleet, the Globus 4 radar system based in Vardø, and their elite cold-weather units have repeatedly executed unannounced missions that are critical links in NATO's overall defense chain. It was Canada that proposed including Norwegian experts in the Arctic Response Exchange Program, a series of strategic officer training and rotation initiatives between the two nations. In joint drills held in Tromsø, Norway, and Yellowknife, Canada, Canadian soldiers for the first time learned how to navigate thin ice using autonomous vehicles, a skill passed down by Norwegians from one generation to the next. No advanced weapon can replace that. Survival knowledge in conditions where even GPS can't locate you accurately. Going even deeper, Norway is partnering with Canada in a war without gunfire, the digital space war. This year, the two countries are co-developing a micro-network sensor system deployed on ice, using AI to detect unusual electronic signals from submarines or surveillance equipment. When a Scandinavian nation invests in polar monitoring technology for a transatlantic partner, it's not diplomacy, it's a promise. If something breaches the ice from below, I'll be the first to detect it and alert you. Norway understands better than anyone that if Canada is ever attacked from the north, not with missiles, but silently, like an unmanned submarine, then the first battlefield won't be on Canadian soil. It could very well be the waters between Greenland and Norway. And because of that, they don't wait for an invitation from Ottawa. They've already expanded their role as a living radar station for the entire NATO alliance, especially for the supply routes toward North America. Perhaps the most striking thing about Norway isn't troop numbers, budget, or hardware, but a rare concept in the modern world: integrity in defense. They don't engage in every conflict, but once they step into the role of protector, they don't turn back. That's why Canada, a country still known for peace and neutrality, chose Norway as its strategic gatekeeper. Because in the life-and-death game of snow and ice, what you need most isn't an ally who can dispatch hundreds of aircraft, but a comrade who won't leave, even when no one is watching. And in the Arctic, as the light dims and radar flashes red, Norway will be the one to turn on the light. Number 7. Sweden. From silent neutrality to ready ally. There are countries that don't need loud declarations to be heard. There are forces that don't need to flaunt troop numbers to prove their strength. And there are allies, like Sweden, who chose to quietly observe for nearly a century, only to enter the game more prepared than anyone else. The year 2025 marks a major turning point on the global strategic map. Sweden, a nation once renowned for its neutrality, has officially joined NATO. But for Canada, this turning point is not simply an expansion of the alliance. It is the perfect addition of a quiet yet refined ally, one who didn't join just to add a name to the list, but brought with them an entire military ecosystem tailored for cold-weather warfare. With over 200 years of military non-alignment, Sweden didn't come to learn how to defend. They came to share a weapon few dare to display: the cold precision of an independent strategic mindset. And for Canada, as the Arctic grows more fragile amid hypersonic weapons testing, cyber warfare, and territorial competition, there is no better partner. Unlike the US with its widespread base network, or the UK with its global military legacy, Sweden's strength lies in concentrating resources on core defense capabilities, and for the past few years, that core has been the Arctic. They've upgraded their entire submarine fleet, added electronic camouflage, and developed sonar systems that filter signals through ice layers, all to serve one single purpose: to intercept any force entering the northern seas before it becomes a real threat. Canada quickly saw the strategic value in this. Since early 2025, the two countries signed a deep cooperation agreement in 3 fields: cyber warfare, anti-submarine operations, and cold region combat. Together, they established a joint command center in Kiruna, a town near Sweden's Arctic Circle, where Canadian troops are trained to handle GPS loss, radar interference, and invisible attack tactics that are increasingly common in thawing ice zones. In a simulated drill in northern Sweden, Canadian soldiers used an electronic ice positioning artillery system, a technology developed by Sweden for the first time, enabling them to detect object movement beneath ice up to 4 meters thick. One Canadian officer said, "We used to think radar was the pinnacle of surveillance. Now we know that on ice, everything must be sensed by sound and patience." That's what makes Sweden different. They don't bring giant cannons. They give you the map of details others don't have the patience to see. Sweden's support doesn't stop at hardware. In the realm of cyber warfare, an equally silent yet brutal battlefield, they've partnered with Canada to develop Northern Echo, an AI-powered system that monitors data flows across Arctic research stations, issuing early warnings if malware or spy devices interfere. While the rest of the world is busy building firewalls, Sweden and Canada have chosen to create an immune system. But the final, and perhaps greatest, reason Canada places its trust in Sweden lies in the very nature of the silence Sweden has preserved for so long. When a country that has avoided conflict for centuries is willing to send ships, experts, and classified strategies to defend a land thousands of kilometers away, that's not obligation. That's a moral choice. And for Canada, in a world where loyalty can be sold for short-term gain, those who choose to stand by you on principle are the most solid line of defense. Sweden isn't loud. They don't chase the spotlight in security summits. They don't demand their name be placed atop alliance structures. But when the Arctic needs a careful hand to maintain its fragile peace, when new waterways emerge like veins across frozen terrain, Sweden has quietly placed sensors, sent people, and shared data without conditions. So if one day the white snow is no longer calm and the ice trails are marked by intruders' footsteps, you can be sure, somewhere in the northern night, Sweden has long activated its monitors, not to observe, but to protect.